At night, North Korea effectively disappears from the map. It looks less like a nation and more like a patch of empty ocean. While its neighbors are defined by blinding webs of light, North Korea is a black hole of 26 million people. But this darkness is deceptive. The state factories might be frozen, but the streets are very much alive. If you could look past the blackout, you find a massive web of illegal stalls, back alleys, and smugglers. This is the Jangmadang, a grassroots copy of capitalism that stepped in when the government failed. It's a parasite economy that saved the regime from collapse in the 90s, but is now the very thing that could destroy it from the inside out. Now, for decades, North Koreans didn't shop for daily necessities. They live under the Public Distribution System or PDS. The government provided a fixed amount of food and clothing to the people based on their social status and perceived loyalty to the state. But this system broke down catastrophically in the mid-1990s. When the Soviet Union collapsed, North Korea lost its primary source of subsidized fuel and fertilizer. Deprived of industrial inputs, the North Korean agricultural system broke down. A series of unprecedented floods, followed by a severe drought, acted as the final blow, leading to a famine so brutal it killed an estimated 10% of the population. As the PDS failed, the social contract died with it. To survive, the North Korean people did something radical. They became entrepreneurs. Housewives became smugglers. Soldiers became security guards for illegal convoys. This was the birth of a three-tiered structure of survival that is still the backbone of the North Korean economy to this day. The first tier is built on the backs of North Korean housewives, or the ajumas. In North Korea, men are legally required to show up at their assigned state jobs, such as being a factory worker. Even if those factories have no electricity, no raw materials, and pay zero salary, if they don't go show up, they'll probably go to prison. However, married women were largely exempt from these work units because they are officially registered as housewives. This created a massive loophole. While the men were off performing work for a crippled state, the women were in the streets, trading homemade tofu, salvaged copper wire, or smuggled clothes. These market aunties became the primary breadwinners of their family. Initially, it was just food, rice, corn, and privately grown crops. Now, the Ajuma sell everything from homemade kimchi and noodles to smuggled Chinese cell phones and USB drives. It's quite ironic that North Korea, out of all countries, has its entire survival rested on the shoulders of women. By the time the regime realized that the Ajumas were the new economic engine of the nation, it was too late to force them back into their homes. The regime did try to do this back in 2005 and 2009, but both attempts failed miserably. The second tier is the infrastructure, the 800 miles of border with China. Because the state can no longer produce even basic goods like soap or needles, a massive shadow supply chain has emerged. This is the lifeline that connects North Korean people with the outside world, running primarily through the Yalu and Tumen rivers. It is a sophisticated logistics network involving bribed border guards and Chinese middlemen. Local border guards, who are often just as hungry as the civilians they watch, frequently act as gatekeepers rather than guards. For the right price, they provide the security for these illegal shipments to cross safely. Through these supply chain arteries, the Jangmadang receive its lifeblood. Chinese-made solar panels to bypass the failing power grid, South Korean cosmetics that signify social status, and the CDs, DVDs, and USB drives that connects North Korean people with the reality of a world they were never meant to see, like Western movies and South Korean music. Finally, at the top of the pyramid are the donju. If the ajumas are the market's body and legs, and the smugglers are its blood, then the donju are its brain. These are the money masters, a ruthless millionaire class that emerged not from political appointment, but from the brutal natural selection of the 1990s famine. They began as wholesalers, buying up small surpluses from thousands of ajumas and moving them across provinces, a task that required massive logistical coordination and, more importantly, the capital to pay off every checkpoint along the way. These are also the people who funded many of North Koreans' housewives with loans to buy raw materials. By the 2010s, these people had accumulated more foreign currency than the North Korean central bank itself. Now, to survive and thrive in a country such as North Korea, the donju has a legal fiction known as the red cap strategy. It's a simple concept. When you want to build a luxury hotel, you approach the Ministry of the Army or a local municipality with a deal. You provide the capital, the materials, and the labor. In exchange, the building is officially registered as a state-owned enterprise. This creates a win-win for all parties when the hotel is done. The state got a shiny new building that they can use to attract tourists. Yes, North Korea does have tourists and propagates socialist success. The officials get a massive recurring bribe that helps to fund their luxury lifestyle, and the donju gets a red cap. Because the business is officially state-owned, the police cannot shut it down. They gain a monopoly and keep the lion's share of the profits. But the biggest role that the donjus play in North Korea is that they act as the nation's shadow central bank. In North Korea, nobody trusts the state to hold their money. The donjus step into this vacuum. They provide high-interest loans to the people, facilitate nationwide wire transfers through mobile phone credits, and even act as currency exchange. All of this sounds like a capitalist success story that does include some predatory behavior, like most other capitalist countries. But later, I will show you how Kim is trying to strike back and regain control of his country from capitalism through renationalization. Because Kim is not stupid. He watched the donju become the shadow central bank throughout the 2010s, and he realized that if he didn't act, he would lose the country. Now, for the last 25 years, Jangmadang has been officially illegal. But it's universally tolerated because it's the only way for anyone to survive, including the officials themselves. This creates the most fascinating mechanism you ever see in economics: systemic corruption. You see, every transaction, every smuggling run, and every market stall requires a bribe paid to the local security agents, police, or party officials. In any other country, we call this corruption. In North Korea, it is the informal tax code, a necessity. Because the official state salary is minuscule, often less than the price of 1 kilogram of rice, bribery is pretty much a necessity for survival. This has transformed the North Korean government from a socialist administration into a national protection racket. The ajumas pay the local police to keep their stalls open. The police pay the local party officials to keep their badges. The politicians send loyalty offerings up the chain to prove their worth. For nearly 30 years, the Kim regime allowed the black market to thrive because it kept their own officials fed and loyal without the state having to pay them. It outsourced the survival of the country to the people and profited from it. But this deal came with a massive hidden cost. By allowing the markets to grow, The Kim regime accidentally did the one thing a totalitarian state should never do. They made themselves optional. For decades, the Kim regime looked at the black market as a necessary evil. But 5 years ago, the state realized that the parasite was no longer just feeding on the system, it was replacing it. In 2021, the regime launched its most aggressive pushback since the 90s. The first step was a direct assault on the market's brain, the donju. Throughout 2023 and 2024, the state intensified crackdowns on foreign currency, effectively banning the use of the US dollar and Chinese yen in local transactions. You see, because the North Korean won is prone to hyperinflation, anyone with a bit of sense stores their wealth in either yen or dollars. By criminalizing these currencies, the state is attempting to evaporate the private wealth of the donju and the savings of the common people, forcing them to return to a state-controlled financial system that no one ever trusts. The donju are coping the only way they know how, by going deeper underground. They are moving away from physical cash and using more sophisticated methods like bartering with high-value goods or utilizing mobile phone credits as a proxy for digital currency. But the risk has skyrocketed. What used to be a standard bribe to a police officer is now often not enough to buy silence when the state is watching. At the same time, the regime has moved to monopolize the most basic necessity, food. Through the 2022 and 2024 amendments to the grain law, the regime has attempted to outlaw the private sale of rice and corn. The state has opened its own state food shops, attempting to undercut the Jangmadang by selling grain at fixed prices. The goal is simple: to force the people back into a state-run line by monopolizing all food distribution. If the state is the only one with a bowl of rice, the state is once again the only thing that matters. From what little reports we do have on ordinary North Korean people's lives, the reaction from the street has been one of exhaustion. Reports from the border provinces suggest that prices for basic goods like eggs and cooking oil have jumped twofold to fivefold as the shadow supply chain became more dangerous to navigate. Also, in 2020 and 2021, the regime introduced the Reactionary Ideology and Culture Rejection Act. It censored many things, but it specifically targets South Korean style speech, clothing, and the distribution of foreign media. This is where Kim's strategy hits a wall. The Jangmadang generation, those born during or after the Great Famine, didn't grow up on state rations. They grew up studying socialism in the morning and practicing capitalism at night. They didn't learn about the world from the state newspapers. They learned it from the smuggled K-dramas and Chinese cell phones. It's safe to say that attempting to indoctrinate this new generation is not an easy task. You can crack down markets and ban the US dollar, yet you cannot delete a memory from people's minds collectively all at once. And this brings us to the present moment, where the Kim regime is attempting a delicate and a dangerous balancing act. On one hand, the regime sees the markets as a slow-motion coup. If the donju and the ajumas become the primary source of wealth and food, the state's political relevance disappears. For Kim, regaining control is an existential necessity. Sure, authoritarian regimes can coexist with semi-legal markets like the case of China or Vietnam. But for this to work, the state has to give up a lot of control over its sovereignty, which is a death sentence for Kim. On the other hand, by forcing people to use a collapsing North Korean won and buying rice from the inefficient state shops, he is effectively draining the lifeblood of the only functional economy the country has. Sure, as of now, markets still dominate in practice, but if crackdowns will be intensified in the future, then people's lives will be at risk. The ultimate risk is a total economic heart attack. Reports from the Bank of Korea, South Korea's central bank, on 23 and 24 show that despite a 3.7% bump in GDP, mostly fueled by selling shells and missiles to Russia, the average North Korean is actually worse off. Daily NK, which conducts secret surveys within the country, reported that in October 2025, rice prices hit an all-time record of 30,000 won per kilogram in Pyongyang. For context, it was around 5,000 won per kilogram in January 2024, a 6-time increase over 1.5 years. In the 1990s, the black market saved North Korea from the state's failure. Today, the state's attempt to kill that market might be the final blow that shatters the regime. As North Korea moves further into the future, the dim glow of Pyongyang may remain, but the invincible frequency of the markets is what will ultimately decide the fate of North Korea. This is Doverhill. Thanks for watching and see you next time.